All right. All right, so you had a pretty good idea already, given the review sheet and the practice test and everything you hopefully looked at this weekend, as to what kind of things to expect on the test. But I'll just elaborate a little bit on some of those and give you the down and dirty details of the test, how many questions, how many marks, okay, all of that kind of stuff, just so you have kind of the full picture for tomorrow. Okay, so first thing we went over was the cell theory. And the cell theory had 3 points, which from a knowledge and kind of factual recall standpoint sets it up very well for a multiple choice question, were I to really want to see if you remember the trivia, okay, of the 3 points of the cell theory, which are that all things are made of cells, cells carry out the basic functions of the organism, and cells reproduce by splitting in half, not from the production, okay, of cells from a certain place. So yes, certainly you should probably know the 3 points of the cell theory well enough to recognize, if I put it in a multiple choice question, which one didn't belong, okay? But more important than that, I want you to understand the applications of the cell theory, especially point number 2, okay? And that is carry out basic functions. Because how many times did that point come back in lab activities and things like that that we did in this unit? How many times did we refer to that? Okay, quite a few, right? I mean, we talked about it in the cell anatomy lab. We talked about it in that in the cell size lab with the cubes, okay, where we talked about cellular transport, things like that. So certainly cells, the job of the cell to carry out the basic functions of the organism is probably the most important part of the cell theory, and you're probably going to need to work it into several written response items, right? I'm not going to say, write out the second point of the cell theory as a written response item, but it might be something that comes up that you might want to incorporate into your answer, right? So if I'm talking about, a situation that's dealing with cell transport, that's an opportunity, obviously, to work in the fact that cell transport is one of the basic functions of the cell, and things like that. So it's always a good opportunity to say, Mr. Kader might be looking for that, and if I talk about it a little bit, it might be worth a mark. If I can find a way to incorporate it, he'll be impressed. All of those things are true. Okay? Now, I'm not saying you should write it into every question. If I'm talking about a plant, showing phototropism, like we talked about last week, going, cells carry out the basic function of the organism, so the cell bent. No, okay, that's probably not going to impress me because it's not a proper application of it. Okay? But certainly, it's something that we want to pay attention to. All right? So yes, there could be a multiple choice question about it, but I would say more we're looking at written response and being able to incorporate it into other kind of bigger scale types of questions. Okay, and then we talked about microscopy. Wow, that M is just awful. Okay, and when we talked about microscopy, I'm not going to ask, I mean, certainly there might be some questions about like Hooke and Leeuwenhoek and Schleiden and Schwann. Certainly they're important in terms of using microscopes and looking at cells, but again, they would be strictly multiple choice answers where you would recognize the names. Okay, in terms of microscopy, I'm more concerned with use of the microscope and probably lab drawings. Okay, so that is, being able to do a proper formatted lab drawing. So, your diagram takes up more than half of the page, your title goes underneath, your magnification and your size go underneath the title, okay? Your labels all go to one side, your name and date go in the top right corner, all of that kind of stuff. So you have an example of that, okay, in your notes that I gave you with the microscopy lab handout. So I'd have a look at that. And then, of course, part of lab drawings is size estimation. And a lot of us struggled with that on our lab drawings in this unit. Okay, properly estimating the size of an object. So we'll just quickly review how that works. I'm looking at something on my high power lens. Okay, so I see the circle of light that you see through the microscope. And I know that on high power, the distance across this circle, the diameter of this circle, is 400 micrometers. Okay, because that's in our notes. And in a question that was asking you to estimate size, I would tell you that again. It's not something I expect you to remember. Okay, I'm looking at this thing, and let's say it looks like that. Okay, how big is that? Approximately, because remember, this is an estimation, right? I'm not looking for, it's 133.358 micrometers, because, yeah, you're never going to get that. Okay, looking for an estimation here. Is this about a third of this? A quarter to a third? Maybe between a third and a half? Okay, and that's along its longest dimension. We always measure on the longest dimension. Okay, if I was looking across this way, I would probably estimate that quite a bit differently. Agreed? Right? But I always estimate along the longest dimension. That's kind of one of the rules. So I would say that this is maybe about 180 micrometers. Okay, it's certainly less than half of the field of view. All right, and that's all you have to do, as long as you're close. Okay, when I'm marking a question like this, I have a definite range of numbers I'm expecting. All right, because I've actually done the measurement and done the calculation, so I know exactly how much it is, and then I just say, all right, I'm going to give leeway of plus or minus this much on either end because I understand you guys are estimating. Okay, all we're doing here is saying it's a little less than half. Half is 200, so it's about 180. That's all you have to do. Okay, does that sort of make sense to everybody? Okay. All right, so yeah, expect you might be asked to do a lab drawing on the unit exam. All right. But again, it's nothing difficult. You're not going to be marked on your artistic ability. That would be so horribly hypocritical of me to do that because you guys know I can't draw. All right, it would be strictly format. Okay, on that. Okay, and then after that, we went over the modes of nutrition. Okay, now could there be multiple choice questions about modes of nutrition? Yep. There could be where you just, you have to remember what a chemoheterotroph is and what a photoautotroph is. Certainly, there could be a recall question, something like that, maybe one or two. But again, this is one of those concepts that's like the second point of the cell theory. It's something that could be important for helping to explain a bigger idea. Right? For example, if you had a question that was showing a plant growing towards the light, okay, and you're talking, well, that's phototropism. Why does a plant exhibit phototropism? Well, because it's photosynthetic. Its mode of nutrition is it needs light to make food. Well, hey, that's not a bad thing to tell me in the answer to that question because A, it's true. Okay, B, it shows you remember it's a photoautotroph and that term is ingrained in your mind. Okay, and all of those things tell me your level of understanding. Guys, it's those things that make the difference between a 3 out of 5 answer and a 5 out of 5 answer. Okay? If we had a situation like that and you said, the plant's growing towards the sun, out of 5 marks, that's going to be 1. Okay? But if you said, the plant's growing towards the sun because it requires sun to make sugar because it's a photoautotroph, it does this by making one side grow faster than the other, using auxins on one side to make the cells grow faster, and then keep explaining each level of detail. Okay, increases the likelihood of getting a good mark on that question. Everyone follow there? Okay, so if you think it applies, write it down. Okay, always a good bet. All right, so modes of nutrition, certainly we need to know those, and then we need to know how that affects cell structure. Okay, so basically differences between plant and animal cells. Okay, plants have some organelles that animals don't, and vice versa. Okay, why are those differences there? Okay, I've actually asked that exact question on a unit exam in the past, and it was worth like 6 or 7 marks. Okay, so basically it was like summarize the differences between plant and animal cells and explain the reasons for those differences. Okay, I haven't asked it that way in a while just because it seemed a lot more like read and regurgitate onto the test, okay, which I'm trying to avoid, okay, but certainly there could be some thought type of questions, higher level thinking kind of questions that would involve you explaining, an animal cell needs a lysosome because it's a chemoheterotroph, and chemoheterotrophs have to digest food for their energy, etc. Okay, is that making sense to everybody there? Okay, so modes of nutrition, okay, certainly big. All right, what are we on here for? Organelles. Yeah, you're going to have to label a cell. Yeah, there's certainly going to be one on there. Okay, your review sheets all had them on there. The practice test had 2. Okay, I'm not going to put 2 on your unit exam, right? But there's certainly going to be a cell on there. You're not going to have to label the whole thing, but since you don't know what parts you're going to have to label, you kind of need to know them all. Okay, so yeah, label the cell. Okay, label and give function, just like our quizzes. Okay, so yeah, that's certainly going to be on there. How much detail am I looking for? Enough that I know that you knew what the function was. So as an example, if one of the things that was numbered was the cell membrane, okay, I would expect that you label that cell membrane controls endo and exocytosis. Okay, you wouldn't have to write any more than that. That's what it does. Okay, it shows me that you remember it, right? Or for the mitochondria, you could say burns sugar for energy. Okay, something like that. Right, it doesn't have to be a long, detailed explanation. There's probably not going to be that much room for that anyway. Okay. And then as kind of part of that, well, it was this part of the same lesson, but I'm going to treat it as a separate topic. Cellular transport. Okay, especially the big 3. All right, so that means diffusion, osmosis, and active transport. There's a question in the written response about each one, I believe. Or did I change that? There's at least 2, if not 3, written response items about cellular transport. And they are all situational questions. So I give you a description of a situation. A cell is doing this, or a cell is in this situation. This is what's going on. Identify which cellular transport process is responsible and explain how it works. Okay, so you'll have to read the question and then look at it and go, okay, it looks like there's salt involved here, and it looks like water is moving, so that's osmosis, okay, and it mentioned something about membranes, and that's osmosis as well. Okay, so I should identify it as osmosis, and I should explain what osmosis is and how it applies in this situation, and then what's going to happen, right? So 4 or 5 mark question on that, or a question that's about diffusion, or a question that's about active transport. Okay, so make sure you go over those so that when you read a situation, you'd be able to recognize which one is going on. Right, so it's about the big 3. Right, we're not going to be talking about the receptor-mediated endocytosis or phagocytosis or any of those. Okay, you don't have to worry about those ones. The big 3 are the ones we're most concerned about. All right. Okay, so I would say when you're studying for this, if you haven't done this already, it's not a bad idea to tonight kind of. You don't have to actually get recipe cards and make like a flashcard, but you should list a couple of the key characteristics of each one so that those are the things that in your mind can be triggers for you when you read the question. Right? So you read the question and you're like, okay, this question's, like I said with the osmosis example, it mentioned membranes, it mentioned the movement of water, and it mentioned salt concentration. Well, okay, as soon as it mentioned membranes, this one was out, okay? Because this one only works inside the cell, not across the membrane. Okay, this one, however, does go across the membrane, and it's only about water, and it's to balance salt. So, yep, okay, there's the characteristics of osmosis. Salt, okay, balancing salt, moving only water across the membrane. That's osmosis. All right, and if it mentions something about using energy, well, there's only one of them. Okay, that applies to, and so you could use that. All right, so little things there that can help you identify and kind of trigger. All right, so definitely a fair amount of marks to do with cellular transport. All right, and there could also be some integration there with this next topic, which is cell size, and function. Okay, and when we're talking about cell size and function, okay, we're talking about this cellular transport process being most important. Okay, as the cell gets really big, diffusion, it doesn't work as well because it's passive and slow and not targeted and blah blah blah. Okay, so certainly that's two things being integrated into one question, and because we did that activity with the cubes, you can certainly expect that this would be something that'll be on there. Okay, and this is also going to be, I mean, there might be a couple of multiple choice questions about this, but this is certainly a written response item. Okay, and you're going to have to do some explaining there, and it is going to be situational. Okay, and by situational I mean I give you a real world situation where something is going on, and you have to explain to me, okay, why does that have to do with cell size, or does it have to do with cell size and a cell's ability to transport material? Okay, questions so far? All right. Then we talked about multicellularity. Actually, we didn't do it in this order, but this is the order I'm reviewing it in. Multicellularity. Cellularity. Okay. Advantages. Okay. Any other keywords that go along with multicellularity? Thinking of one rather long, starts with S. Specialization. Okay, that has to do with, okay, for something to be a true multicellular organism, there's got to be that division of labor. Some cells are specialized to do this job, some cells are specialized to do that job. Okay, so yeah, certainly that's something that'll probably come up. Okay, that could be a multiple choice kind of question where it's, which of the following is a characteristic of a true multicellular organism? Specialization would be one of those. Okay, stuff like that. Okay, then we had transport and multicellular organisms, essentially transport in plants, because that's the only ones we really looked at. Okay, so in plants, okay, for transport, certainly, yes, we need to remember, that process of water evaporates through the stomates and that leaves salt behind, and the salt brings the osmotic pressure and all that stuff we've talked about a million times. Yes, you definitely have to know that process. Yes, you're definitely going to have to explain that process. There's going to be, a question, maybe including a picture, right, that's asking you to, apply your knowledge to this situation, because that's a lot of what biology is now, is just here's the situation. Can you interpret what you know and apply what you know, okay, to this? So yeah, there's going to be some questions on that. So again, you're going to need to refer to your lab, okay, your transport and plants lab that we did. We went over it last week. Refer to your notes, okay. Certainly talk about the layers of the leaf, okay. Okay, in terms of transport, but also in terms of specialization. Okay, so again, the thing with bio, guys, that's different from chem is there's not a lot of skills to demonstrate, but there's a lot of relationships to see, okay, or to be able to explain. Lots of things are tied together, right? Whereas in chemistry, it's like, well, I got to do the mole equation. I just got to be able to do that. I got to be able to balance this equation over here, okay? Whereas in bio, it's I got to read this stuff and then I got to think about how can these two things get tied together, because Mr. Coder might ask that. Okay, so yeah, definitely know about transport in plants, okay, and about the xylem and the phloem. Okay, certainly I can't remember a test where I did not ask about the xylem and phloem in the written response. Okay, not just in the multiple choice, but in the written response. Okay, asking about their structure and location and how they work and what moves in them. Okay, so remember which one transports what. Can be able to explain that. So really big stuff there. Okay, and again, the parts of the plant, not just the layers of the leaf, but how are the roots and stem also involved, okay, in the plant as a multicellular organism. Okay, factors affecting plant growth. The reason we went over that, okay, wasn't to remind you that plants need water, okay, to grow, or that plants need sunlight to grow. It's again because you're going to encounter questions that are, a plant is in this situation. How is that going to affect it, and why? All right, so then you have to think, okay, it's in this situation. What factors are being negatively affected in this situation? Is it getting less light? Is it really cold? Is it growing in poor soil? And so you're thinking about, okay, these things affect the plant's growth. Are any of those present in the situation Mr. Coder described in this question? Now what's that going to do with the plant? So that's the whole reason we went over that, was just to remind everybody about plants need certain things, and when certain things happen in their environment, it affects them in this way. Okay, so that would certainly be part of a written response question, not so much for itself, like I'm not going to say list all the factors we talked about in class that affect plant growth, because I'm not going to. Okay, but will you be able to identify which ones are most important in a situation, and then figure out what they're doing to a plant? And as the last thing, how is the plant going to respond to that? Okay, because that was the last thing we covered, the tropisms. Okay, phototropism, geotropism, and thigmotropism. The mechanism for all of them is the same. All right, and that you'll need to explain. Okay, that's the good news though, is that the mechanism, how they all happen, is the same. Okay, what causes them to happen is different. It's either light or gravity or touch, but how they respond, how they bend their stem is the same no matter which type of tropism is going on. So you only have to remember that once. Okay, and we talked about that last week, and that we have to have the hormones that cause cells to get longer, which are those ones, okay, being secreted to one side of the plant, so that one side of the plant grows faster than the other, and that causes that bending effect. Okay, that mechanism is the same for all of them, right? But in a situation, I'll tell you right now, there's a question on there, and it's a picture. It says, here's this plant. See how funny it looks. Here's what happened to it. Explain how it got to look this way. All right? Real-world situational type of question where you now have to apply your knowledge of tropisms and the mechanism by which they happen to a real-world situation. Everyone follow? Okay? There's just so much of that in bio. All right? And it gets more so even when you get to bio 20 and bio 30. All right? Okay, that's what's on there. Right? So 10 kind of major concepts. Obviously, there's minor things strewn throughout that, but you kind of saw in the multiple choice part of that practice test I gave you what kind of things are going to be asked in there. It's mostly recall stuff, right? But the written response stuff was quite a bit more in depth. Okay. All right. Questions from you guys? Anything on the review that gave you trouble? How many people are done the practice test and the review sheet? Oh, wow. I was so hoping for more hands. Okay. Okay, so for your exam tomorrow, there's 25 multiple choice. There are 9 written response. And in those 9 written response, there are 54 marks. So, which part should you do first? Please, for the love of God, do the written response first. Okay? I beg you, please, do the written response first. The multiple choice, you could very easily rush through. Okay? Were you to get pressed for time, you could easily rush through the multiple choice and probably still get, most of them right. Okay? Even without really taking a lot of time on them. So do them last. Okay, make sure you do a good job of the big mark stuff, because several of the questions have an A and a B. Okay, your labeling of the cell is several marks in the written response and stuff like that. So, okay, make sure you're going over that stuff there. And like I said, you've got a bunch of apply your knowledge kind of questions. Okay, so starting out with plants and how they regulate water. No one's writing that down, eh? Plant growth responses, labeling the cell, any stuff to do with microscopy and lab drawings, plant transport, cell transport, plant growth and development, and cell transport. Gee, quite a few there. All right, so that's the stuff that you need to be ready for. All right, well, you've got about 40 minutes or so here left. Let's use our time effectively. Since I didn't see a lot of hands up on that practice test or the review sheet, I would say some of you could work on that. Okay, if you're done that, then you can do other studying types of activities, but you have the time available to you now. Okay, if you have questions, please ask.